All right. All right. So, Black Bottom. I mean, you just have so many instances. Well, I was talking about the housing recession and the selling of predatory loan products in the city. I mean, just so many predatory financial practices have existed in this city for so long, and they have benefited, white power brokers, and there's also a certain class of black power brokers that have also benefited. Which has in some ways helped to suppress some of the outrage because it's confusing to people when somebody who seems like, somebody who cares has done that. I mean, most people don't know that in 1999, Kwame Kilpatrick was a House Minority Leader, and he voted for House Minority Whip, and he voted for and led other Detroit representatives vote for the takeover of Detroit Public Schools. And so he's one of us, right? And he did it. And I think that it's made it so that people find it very hard to trust anybody. It's created a political trauma. It's like we have post-political exploitation trauma going on in our community where nobody trusts anybody to represent their needs very well. And our water department was taken away. It's being overseen by, once again, another African-American man who people see as having benefited from everything from the fall of Kwame Kilpatrick to emergency management, and now he's over water, and it makes the trust levels very low. So I don't know if that was your question, but that's
absolutely. And of course, the water infrastructure has just been the target, I think, of a lot of really racist arguments. Again, like reporters can manage their own water, the water company is bankrupt, which is actually not really true in so many levels.
Right, but I mean, the water management, that was the only city department that did not require at one point, city council oversight. And you had a federal judge who was making all kinds of decisions on behalf of a constituency that was clearly not Detroit. The 8317 rule stands out as something that's extremely offensive in the division of, work. And somebody pointed, there's just so much about how water was managed and the perception that there's all of this money in water. And therefore, everybody wanted to control it. And now Gleewood does. Suburban departments used to upcharge water they purchased at wholesale rates and then blame Detroit and say Detroit is, sticking it to you. That's why you're paying this high rate for the water that you're managing. And I believe that the creation of Gleewood helped to incentivize all of these water shutoffs because the city had to demonstrate financial responsibility by cracking down on people, non-paying customers. And I think that's, disgusting because in Oakland County, in Macomb County, when people don't pay their water bills, it goes onto their tax bills, but water is not shut off in those communities like it is in Detroit and Wayne County. And I'm not saying I think it needs to go on to tax bills because we have a whole nother issue with, property tax. But I think that the methods of collection and the mindset around collection are very different in Detroit. It is a very punitive mindset that Gleewood brings forward and that it seems as though some people in DWSD happily enforce.
So, I know that you're in conversations with folks who are at Good Jobs Now. We're talking about programming around how water impacts housing. Could you maybe reflect a little bit about that, especially in terms of what you're seeing on the east side and how you're trying to address the situation?
The biggest part of how housing impacts housing is going to be, we did a survey, actually, water survey. We got 1,000 responses, and the biggest response was street flooding, followed by, sewer backups and flooding in the basement, followed by water shutoffs. And so when people live on streets with a lot of water that just is standing and pooled, that's a quality of life issue that impacts whole neighborhoods. And I don't know that there has been an effective response to that. I know that what we're trying to do is promote the use of green infrastructure as a mechanism to reduce street flooding and improve the water management inside of neighborhoods. There have been instances where some people have planted rain gardens in their front and backyards and reduced flooding in their basements. And so we think that can work, or that can be a mechanism. We are also trying to make sure people are educated about what's going on in their community. In the Jeff Chalmers area, this year we're planning on doing a study in the area to help figure out what are the possibilities. Can you build a seawall? If so, what would it cost to build a seawall? I've been told by some people that you can't, because building a seawall pushes the problem into other communities. But Grosse Pointe Park did build a seawall, and because of that, they are not in a floodplain, and because of that, they don't have to purchase flood insurance, which is something that is a risk for Jeff Chalmers, because it is tentatively declared a floodplain by FEMA, and in the near future, residents there will have to purchase flood insurance if they own their homes. So,
there are different rules for Grosse Pointe versus Jefferson Chalmers.
I don't know if it's different rules. I don't know if that is the rule, that you can't build a seawall. I think we need to figure out what the rules are. I've had that conversation actually on Facebook. I had that conversation because Gary Brown posted on something. During the debates, somebody pointed out that what was happening in Jeff Chalmers was a result of broken infrastructure. And I don't believe that's what's going on there right now. I believe that the flooding there is global climate change and the rising sea levels, and it's happening all over. And so you really have to separate the issues. I blame DWSD when it makes sense, but we are living in a larger context of our water levels are rising everywhere, and nobody's quite sure what to do about it. And so I said, I think Gary Brown said the individual homeowners would need to build seawalls. And I said, that's an inadequate response. What about vacant homes? And if somebody doesn't comply, that impacts every property in the neighborhood. The city needs to take that responsibility out. And the feedback I continually get from the city is that's expensive. Well, you're probably spending, how much money are you spending satisfying damage claims from people inside the neighborhood because their properties are getting damaged in some of these processes? So I think it's an important conversation for us to have. It's important for us to look at what works. 5 years ago, we were encouraging people in the Jeff Chalmers neighborhood to do green infrastructure. We thought that was going to help address the issue. And then, a couple of years ago, we got a grant to invest in some projects there. When the city did its planning of the Jeff Chalmers area, they did not include any green infrastructure, and the residents there were really upset. Why aren't you putting green infrastructure in our neighborhood? And they said, because it won't work here, because you're on a floodplain. And in our talks with most other people, everybody says that's true. It won't work here. And so we kind of, I think, unknowingly misled people in the community to believe these are the solutions or these are things that may help you. And because that has been wrong, I think coming up with strategies that say this is what will help you is important.
Going back to the issue of water affordability and shut-offs, there's a lot of incredible shame and stigma associated with that. And I wonder, to what extent, how are you seeing people actually come up to you and actually share that, yes, I can't really deal with these incredibly high bills. I'm having troubles paying for my clean water in my home. Is that so? Are you having difficulty with people actually reporting?
Yeah, people don't want to share. Most people don't want to share it as a source of shame, and it's intentionally a source of shame because you listen to all of the talking, from Sheila Cockrell telling people to go to the Detroit River and get a bucket or whatever she was saying, to some of the other conversations taking place. It's always looked at as an aspect of character. First of all, poverty is made shameful in our community. We're not ashamed of the rich people who are taking all the resources. People are ashamed to be poor because it's looked at as something that should not exist. I don't want to go off topic too much, but let's look at what happens in our society where we look at there's almost this moral character to wealth. And, you have churches preaching prosperity. And then you have all of these programs, every social program that you want, if you can find, the goal is self-sufficiency. We're going to help move these people towards self-sufficiency. And that means that we're going to stabilize their homes and we're going to get them goal-oriented, because the Lord can't help those who won't help themselves. That's our mindset. We don't understand the structural nature of poverty, that the poor have to exist in a society like ours. It's a necessity. And the poor have always existed, and there's always been an exploited labor force that exists in our country to make this economy work. It's not moral, it's intentional, it's a designed place for people to be. And right now, the design is to leave more people out of the workforce. Whenever you have full employment, it creates a problem for employers because they have to pay people more. And so I think that I would love to take the stigma away, but I don't have the power to change a culture and a mindset and years of conditioning. What we can do is partner with those organizations that have done a very good job figuring out how to have those conversations by working with people who really know how to connect. I don't expect people to have to be able to say something to me, but can I support those people who are in the trenches doing the work? And can we have more intentional relationships between community development and social justice organizations that are really addressing the water crisis? I think that's the challenge. Because again, I just think that if that's not what you do, and if you have not got a lot of skills and you don't put a lot of energy into it, people are going to hide their poverty from you. They're going to hide their water shutoffs from you. There's a fear their kids will be taken. There's a fear that people will look at them as disgusting, and who wants to be seen in that way.
So I know you also maintain really good contacts with some of these groups like Hyper Detroit as well as We the People of Detroit. Has the Eastside Community Network had some of these groups come over here and talk to members of the ECN or do programs like that, or is that something that you are more working on a supportive role?
We need to do a better job with that. I have a good relationship with Miko. I have a good relationship with Monica. I think they are phenomenal people. Moving beyond thinking they're phenomenal people to figuring out how to have a structured partnership where my staff know who they are, where they know who my staff are, and we can say, let's figure out how to solve these problems together. We're not there yet, and it's a place we need to be. So I'm really looking forward to some future opportunities in the very near future for us to try to have some community forums together and try to begin, sharing our perspectives. And the reality is, in my opinion, that community development is very different from some of the social justice organizations. In community development, you're trying to create something. And that means that you have to get the cooperation from city officials. You have to get the cooperation from, and really work in coalition with people with whom you may have very strong disagreement. So I can't necessarily say things to people that I feel all of the time in order to maintain that coalition. We need people who are able and free to say exactly what needs to be said. And we need to learn how to trust each other. That just because I'm not the one screaming and shouting does not mean I don't see it. But I don't see how I can do the job I have to do if I'm doing that. And I think the work I have to do is also important as part of that. We need an inside-outside strategy around social change in our community. We always needed people in the streets screaming and, creating public disturbances. And we also needed people who were, in various places throughout the community where they were able to be inside the rooms where the decisions get made. And we see ourselves as almost in the room where the decisions get made. We're not really loved by those people, but we have them come to our table sometimes in ways that other people may not be able to. So I think that's the challenge right now. I'm working with 20 other community development organizations as part of a cohort that is funded by the Kresge Foundation. And one of the things that the Ford Foundation is really encouraging us to do is to figure this thing out, figure out how to build those connections and make sure that social justice is more centered in our work. It is shameful to me that most of us were not involved in tax foreclosure prevention until Dan Gilbert funded it. If people's homes are being taken, we should be fighting to help people keep them regardless of whether we get funding. Now, I'm proud to say we knocked on all the doors that we could, and we tried to educate people as much as we could, and we didn't wait for the funding. So when the funding came, it was just a little bit, but it was, but we still have tax foreclosure workshops once a week where we try to help people avoid losing their homes. But I think that our sector has to be more intentional about serving the people inside of the neighborhoods and making sure those relationships are as valued as the relationships with city government. And when we get in the rooms with city government officials, we have to make sure we're speaking on behalf of the people who aren't there. And I'll say that that's something that we do here. That if I'm in a room and somebody from the mayor's office is there, somebody from the water department is there, I'm going to tell them exactly what I think and what I think the people in the community think. Now, I may not shout it out on Facebook, but one-on-one, that's done. Yeah.
One of the problems, I think, with the water issue in Detroit is often a lack of reliable data. And this is where citizen science work, like, the mapping project, and the people becomes really helpful in terms of understanding where exactly is the problem and how is this problem actually panning out. So on the east side, which is a large area of geography, are there particular zones that you are focusing on in terms of either water affordability or GSI or foreclosure issues related to water bills?
What we've done is we've pulled together the Lower East Side Action Plan. And what we've looked at is the entire Lower East Side area. We've looked at where there are where there's flooding, and we've talked about green infrastructure strategies in those areas. And so it's a book that was done by a planning study that was completed by the University of Michigan in 2017, I believe, late 2017. So one of the things that we do is we try to analyze the data. What does the data say? A second thing that we've done is we focused in on 3 neighborhoods where we're trying to provide specific and unique interventions. And so the neighborhoods that we focused on, actually there's going to be a 4th this year, but the neighborhoods we focused on are the Chandler Park neighborhood, which is adjacent to the Chandler Park Golf Course, and in Chandler Park itself. That neighborhood was a neighborhood where we had historic ties, and so we were looking at the devastation caused by foreclosure and the opportunity also to help rebuild that neighborhood because there was still a lot of intact housing there and there's still an engaged resident organization. So we said, why don't we focus on here and try to bring this back? This mayor is saying the Fitzgerald neighborhood is where he wants to go. The Chandler Park neighborhood is actually a better investment for the city if they would come in here because there's more strength inside that neighborhood. And so we've been trying to get city officials to say we're going to just invest in housing. Our focus on housing is getting housing on the land bank back to productive use at affordable rates. So what would it take to build, if you take an existing home that is owned by the land bank, you can possibly get it for $1,500 if it's not in good condition and they're not able to sell it outright through auction. And it would take less money to fix that home up and make it affordable and available than it would to build from the ground up. And so our advocacy has been, we need to utilize vacant homes as an affordability strategy. And the city should set aside money to make that possible. And we've been trying to model that out and working with people to say, let's figure out what it would cost. Let's say it takes $50,000 to fix up this home and purchase it. If you build a house that's subsidized, it's going to cost about $200,000 to build, and you're not getting $150,000 in subsidy. So you can't target people at the same income level if you're doing new construction as you can if you're doing renovation. If you're doing it for $50,000, you could really target people for occupancy who are at or below 30% of the area median income, and that's where you see the real shortage. So that's not foreclosure prevention, but it is saying, how do we help strengthen the neighborhood by putting people, live bodies in this neighborhood, and helping to rethink how we rehouse people inside of neighborhoods. The city has a multifamily housing strategy, and Detroit is a single family city, and most of the multifamily homes that are being developed cannot accommodate families. So it's pushing families out of our community and into neighboring suburbs when they lose their home because of a lack of adequate supply of housing, and we want to stop that. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. We are also working in a neighborhood that has been coined good stock by the residents, and it's actually several neighborhoods coming together that are abandoned and mostly outside of the hardest hit areas, and so there's really no targeted funding. And the question at the time was, how do we get any investment into these neighborhoods? So we did a study that is almost complete, where we were trying to see if companies that were building could comply with the post-construction stormwater ordinance by doing green infrastructure in those neighborhoods. And that would we could use those funds to demolish homes that are open and dangerous, and also to just beautify and create different opportunities inside of a neighborhood that looks abandoned. And also manage stormwater in that area and teach and model that. So that's another project as we engage in other community planning in the area to figure out some other ways to strengthen the homes. And then we're working in the McDougal Hunt neighborhood, and we're working with residents in that neighborhood around creating a sustainable redevelopment plan, where we look at the abundance of vacancy there and we say, what are some sustainable uses for the land? How do we put these vacant buildings and structures back to productive use while maintaining the existing population? And so we're working with a couple of neighborhood leaders, including one who was part of the disbanded Citizens District Council, and many others, to conceptualize what this neighborhood could look like. And we want to see solar in there. We want to. There is a park that's going in that will address the needs of everybody, young to old, including disabled. We just put in a Kaboom playground, and we're going to do green infrastructure and other things in the park. So, and in all of our work, we bring forward neighborhood voice. We have meetings. We want people to tell us what their priorities are and to match those priorities with opportunities, and again, use that as an opportunity to represent the neighborhood and help the neighbors represent themselves. Finally, we have assembled, and we're funding 14 sustainability fellows, and we're training them on sustainability so that these issues that we discussed regarding water, and really we haven't talked about climate health, but that's a big part of what we're dealing with, that we are looking at all of those things, and that we're so that they can become neighborhood leaders and provide some leadership support to all of those initiatives. We are paying them a stipend and then giving them a $5,000 project grant to implement a sustainability project in their neighborhoods.
Do you see any potential impact of the FCA expansion, for instance, which is the big news on the Eastside, I guess? But do you see that potentially impacting any of this work on GSI or water-related issues in the Eastside?
They have taken 2 street blocks to create a large green infrastructure project that they are calling Lake Beneteau. And it's across the street from a parking lot, but it's in the community, and it's going to be fenced and available for the community to see and experience and learn about green infrastructure. So what they've said is that they've been absent from the community and they intend to connect with the community to promote green infrastructure education. That's one way. I would hope that they would invest in other projects in the community that are not directly benefiting them.
Right.
And so we've asked them to do that also. And especially in the neighborhood that is just east of their plants between Mack and Jefferson. If we had enough green infrastructure there, that could help slow the water draining into the community, because it's almost like it goes downhill into Jeff Chalmers. And so we've actually outlined in our LEAP report some areas where they could invest that would make a huge impact or a significant impact on flooding in Jeff Chalmers. Because green infrastructure in Jeff Chalmers won't help, but green infrastructure north of Jeff Chalmers will. So we've had those conversations with them. There are some significant air quality issues that people in the community, including us, are trying to help them figure out. We also believe in vegetative buffers will help with water management and also air quality and also beautification if they're properly designed. And so we are really encouraging that. But, I think there's one thing that's FCA, and then there's the city. And the city sets policy, and the city sets standards for how things are done. And so we do have the post-construction stormwater ordinance, which just passed, and that kind of gets at some of this. But what I don't understand is how anybody in 2019 could plan on expanding operations and build all these parking lots. Like, are you kidding me? Everything that gets an abatement is a parking lot. LCA, FCA, parking lots all over the place. And is there no better thinking? Could we even have a parking structure so that you reduce the surface area of parking these cars? I just don't understand why our public officials aren't pushing them harder. I expect Fiat Chrysler to behave like a corporation, right? They exist for one reason, and we know what that is. Well, I expect our government to protect and act on behalf of residents inside of a community. I know a lot of people are really mad at FCA about whatever they see FCA doing and not doing, but they only do what our government lets them get away with. Where's the mayor on this? And where's city council?
At the end of the day, the company is going to say, well, this is the minimum requirement, and we are following the minimum requirement.
And they may even say, you know what, we've exceeded the minimum requirement. But where are the standards? I mean, and why is it that we allow people to bypass the standards? It doesn't make sense to me. How can you on one breath tell people that all of these parking lots are contributing to a stormwater issue, and in the same breath say, aren't we excited they're building all these parking lots? And it felt like, and it still feels like, they should have been required to share with us the architectural design, some type of schematic design, so we would know what this would look like. I've seen pictures that kind of flash like this, but I have no idea what's going to happen in a space that is literally adjacent to this office. Look out our parking lot and you'll see where it's being built. That's it. I read the paper and they talk about these 3 buildings and what's going on, and they put this big, and they say, oh, we've made lots of progress. Progress towards what? What will each building be used for? What? Maybe you've heard the news and you understand. I'm still at a loss about what's happening with them. Now, if I wanted to design something, build anything, a treehouse, and there is a treehouse being built in our community, I'd have to submit it for, review. And if public subsidy is going in there, shouldn't that be public review where everybody gets to know what this is going to look like? And I feel as though the city created a real crisis, because I knew they were planning on building and expanding in September. And I was not the first person. They've been talking about that since probably half a year before I found out. I was told at that time that they needed this property in order to make that expansion. September rolled by, October, November, December, January, February, and they come out and they say, oh, we've got 6 weeks to finalize this. And so it's an intentional crisis time crunch where there's just not time to figure this out. There's just not time to tell you this. You made it so that there was not enough time, in my opinion, for the public to be meaningfully engaged in a project that basically we are subsidizing. And not just through tax abatements. The city of Detroit purchased land to give to them. The city of Detroit removed a whole berm from Warren to Mac to Warren to give to Fiat Chrysler. And then there's like $400 million in tax abatements. So
Ridiculously high prices.
So, let me say this real quickly. Nothing I say is real quick, but let me say this. Are they doing something in terms of stormwater? They're complying. At a $400 million tax credit in a city where we know there's a stormwater crisis right around the block from them, they could do more than comply. They could be part of the solution, and that would help with goodwill. And that's really what we're trying to push them to do, is to do more than just comply around stormwater. There is a water crisis next door.
Indian Island. So, I guess to close out, where do you see this movement or this situation headed towards? We have so many problems related to, we've been having mass water shutoffs now for 5-6 years now. Policy, unfortunately, has not changed despite so much great work on the ground, activism work, behind the scenes work. At the same time, we are also seeing some inventive and creative coalition building going on, both at the local level and the state level. So I see both promising signs, but also somewhat really a lot of depressing news really all around. What is your take on where this entire issue related to water, affordability, flooding, infrastructure, racism, where do you see this moving?
I think we've got to get the information out there and in a way that the public understands it and the public prioritizes it. I think that we have got to propose policy solutions. The Green New Deal is an example of a policy solution, a policy framework that people came up with and said, here's how we're going to deal with it. Do we need a Detroit New Deal? Do we need something that really specifies actions? Because everybody knows what the problems are, and there are so many problems being in Detroit. Do I care about water or murder or, what? I mean, there's just a lot. And there's almost like crisis overload, because then you have, this idiot who is, serving in the White House. And it's like, I can't even keep straight my crises. I don't think people need to be more aware or more woke or more any of that. I think people need to be more hopeful and visionary, because hope is what causes people to do something different. Right? Hope is what gets people out to vote. Hope is what gets people out to your community meetings, not anger, not frustration. I might be dealing with my own problems at home. Now I got to go to this angry meeting and deal with all of these angry people. So I wonder if there is a way for us to distill some of this into some very specific and concrete policy ideals, and then push them and engage the community in pushing for positive change that we know is going to make a difference. All of these coalitions, we can fight our individual fights, but we can come together around policy. I also think that there has to be more mutual respect in the industry. I do what I do, you do what you do, we do it differently. We all care about the same things, and we have a tendency to demonize people who are not doing or lined up specifically and completely with anything we think. I watch the Charter Commission meetings, and I'm like, 9 out of 10 people sitting on the Charter Commission, I really do think probably want to do something good. Not everybody, but maybe one or two who don't really have a public, commitment to that. Maybe we don't agree on what that good thing is, but we're not devils. And I think the way that we go about the argument becomes very alienating when people have to choose sides between this person and that person. I think if we can be more, if there's more bridge building, if there's more focus on the solution, on the vision, what we want to see happen in our community, then we will have hope. And that's what we try to do.
Are you in favor of state-based water affordability plan?
I have very radical beliefs about that. Yes, I'm in favor of that we should not have to pay for water. Do you know that in New York City, someone told me that New York City residents don't have to pay for water? I don't know if it's true or not.
Really?
Yeah, I just heard that the other day. I don't understand why water is treated like a commodity. It's not. Water is a natural resource. There's so many things that you don't pay for outside of taxes paying. We have to figure out how to raise enough taxes to make our system function. And I don't think that water charges should exist unless people are excessive in their use of water. But normal uses of water, I don't think people should be charged for. And I think that coming up with a mechanism to fund all of that would be great. Ultimately, given the growing infrastructure needs and the aging infrastructure and what we know about the climate and what we know about water, we're going to have to make huge investments in it. And at some point, water is only going to be affordable to people with middle incomes and higher. And even people with middle incomes are going to be stressed paying the water bills if we actually did what we needed for the water infrastructure. If we took the burden of that off of ratepayers and put it onto taxpayers. Rates are regressive, inherently regressive. Taxes are progressive, especially when you have, graduated taxes. So, yeah,